You know that moment when you realize your life is just one big joke and you're the punchline? Yeah, that's me. My name's Malcolm, I'm 12, and I've spent most of my short life figuring out how to survive being a walking statistic. Foster care, hand-me-down everything, and a revolving door of well-meaning families who treated me like a project they could abandon whenever it got inconvenient. But hey, it's not all bad. At least I've got a killer sense of humor about it. The latest stop on my tour of disappointment is the Brucks household, home of Greg and Jen Bruck. Now let me paint you a picture. Greg's the kind of guy who probably peaked in high school when his football team almost made regionals. He's got a beer belly that jiggles every time he laughs at his own jokes, which, spoiler alert, aren't funny. Then there's Jen, who's so obsessed with self-help books she probably thinks Tony Robbins is her spirit animal. Together, they're the perfect couple. If the goal was to win a gold medal in performative charity, they didn't adopt me because they wanted a kid. Let's be real, they adopted me because Uncle Sam sends them a nice fat check every month for helping out. You'd think that'd at least buy me a decent bed, but no. My room is barely bigger than a closet, and I'm pretty sure the wallpaper is held up by sheer willpower. The rest of the house isn't much better. Beige walls, beige furniture. It's like living inside a giant vanilla pudding, only less appetizing. Life with the Brucks is about as thrilling as watching paint dry. Every morning Jen's yelling about how I need to earn my keep, which apparently means scrubbing floors and folding laundry while she pretends to meditate in the living room. Greg's no better. When he's not at work, he's either parked in front of the TV, watching sports, or hosting poker nights with his buddies. And let me tell you, these guys are a real treat. Imagine a bunch of middle-aged men in Confederate flag t-shirts laughing at their own racist jokes while downing cheap beer. It's like a sitcom, except nobody's laughing but them. School isn't exactly my sanctuary either. I'm the only black kid in a sea of white faces, and trust me, they don't let me forget it. Every day feels like walking into a battlefield where the weapons are side eyes and passive-aggressive whispers. One time, this kid Chad, because of course his name was Chad, thought it'd be funny to ask me if I was lost. I told him I was looking for the nearest place to dump his face after I kicked it in. That shut him up for a while, but the whispers never stopped. They never do. My only escape is the library, this dusty little corner of town where nobody bothers you as long as you're quiet. I spend hours there, losing myself in books about people who actually made something of their lives. Malcolm X, Harriet Tubman, Martin Luther, King Jr., they're my heroes. They remind me that maybe, just maybe, I'm not destined to be a footnote in someone else's story. But even that small comfort doesn't last long once I'm back at the Brucks' house. One night, after cleaning up the mess from Greg's poker night, because apparently that's my job too, I decided to poke around the attic. It's the kind of place you'd expect to find skeletons, both literal and metaphorical. In the corner, I spotted this old wooden chest that looked way too fancy to belong in this sad excuse for a house. I figured, what the hell? It's not like I had anything better to do. So I pried it open. Inside, I found a bunch of old papers and photos. Most of it was just boring stuff. Bills, receipts, the kind of junk people keep for no reason. But then I saw a name written in bold letters on a faded document, Jefferson. The name felt familiar, but I couldn't quite place it. Something about it sent a shiver down my spine, like I'd just stumbled onto a secret I wasn't supposed to know. Before I could dig any deeper, the door creaked open and there was Jen, looking like she'd just caught me stealing the crown jewels. She snatched the papers out of my hands faster than I could say a word and yelled at me to stay out of her stuff. Her voice was shaking and her face was pale, like she was scared of something. It was the first time I'd seen her lose that fake perky attitude, and honestly, it freaked me out. That night, as I lay in my too small bed staring at the cracked ceiling, I couldn't stop thinking about that name, Jefferson. Who were they? And why did Jen look like she'd seen a ghost? Something about this didn't add up, and I was determined to figure out what it was. Little did I know, the answer was going to change everything. The thing about secrets is, once you catch a whiff of one, it's impossible to let it go. It's like that itch on your back you can't quite reach, annoying, relentless, and driving you insane. That's exactly how I felt after seeing that name, Jefferson. It wasn't just some random name scrawled on a piece of paper. It felt important, like it had weight to it. And the way Jen reacted? Oh, that just cranked my curiosity up to 11. If she didn't want me poking around, then I was definitely onto something worth poking into. The next morning at breakfast, I couldn't help but notice the tension. Greg was wolfing down his eggs like a man trying to avoid eye contact, while Jen hovered over the toaster with this weird, forced smile plastered on her face. It was the kind of smile that screamed, "I'm pretending everything's fine while I internally combust." "You slept late," she said, her voice sweet enough to make my teeth ache. I hope you're not planning to spend all day lounging around. Yeah, Greg chimed in with his mouth full, because manners are apparently optional in this house. You've got chores, kid. That attic's not going to organize itself. I almost choked on my cereal. The attic? After last night, they wanted me to go back up there. Either they were testing me or they thought I was too dumb to notice something was up. Spoiler, I'm not dumb, but I played along. Sure thing, I said, keeping my tone casual. Wouldn't want all those dust bunnies forming a union or anything. Jen shot me a look, but I just smiled back. If they thought they could outsmart me, they had another thing coming. Later that day, while Jen was out at one of her yoga/find your inner goddess classes, and Greg was parked in front of the TV yelling at a football game, I made my move. Sneaking back into the attic wasn't hard. The tricky part was being quiet enough not to alert Greg. I climbed up the rickety ladder, my heart pounding in my chest, and made a beeline for the chest. This time, I didn't bother with the little stuff. I went straight for the documents that had Jefferson's name on them. Most of it was hard to make out. Faded ink, legal jargon that made my eyes cross, but one thing stood out. An old photo of a man with sharp features and skin as dark as mine. He was wearing a suit that screamed important, and something about him felt familiar, like looking at an older, more dignified version of myself. I was so engrossed in the photo that I didn't hear Greg until he was right behind me. "What the hell are you doing up here?" he barked, his voice booming in the confined space. I froze, clutching the photo like it was a lifeline. "Just cleaning like you asked," I said, trying to sound nonchalant. "Don't get smart with me," he snapped, yanking the picture out of my hands. His face turned a shade of red I didn't think was humanly possible. "This stuff is off limits. You got that?" I nodded. But inside, my mind was racing. Why was he so angry? What was so dangerous about some old documents and a photograph? As I climbed back down the ladder, I could hear him muttering to himself, something about burning the damn thing. My stomach churned. Whatever was in that chest, it wasn't just family junk. It was something big. Something they were desperate to keep hidden. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the scene in my head, trying to piece together the puzzle. The photo, the name, the way Jen and Greg acted like the world was ending, it all pointed to one thing. They were hiding something, and I was going to find out what. Over the next few days, the vibe in the house shifted from tense to downright hostile. Jen barely spoke to me, and when she did, her voice was icy. Greg, on the other hand, couldn't stop glaring at me, like I was a ticking time bomb he didn't know how to defuse. Even school felt different. Maybe it was my imagination, but I swear the whispers got louder, the stares more pointed. It was like everyone knew something I didn't. The final straw came one evening when I overheard Jen on the phone. She was in the kitchen, her voice low but frantic. "No, he doesn't know anything," she hissed. "I told you, we're handling it. Just keep your mouth shut and it'll all blow over." I crept closer, straining to hear more, but she must have sensed me because she hung up abruptly. "Malcolm," she called, her voice all sugary sweetness again. "Why don't you go to your room? You've had a long day." "Sure, Jen. I'll just go lie in bed and not think about how you're clearly plotting something shady." Totally normal, but I couldn't let it go. That night, after they'd gone to bed, I snuck back into the attic. If they were going to play dirty, then so was I. This time, I found more than just papers. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard was a leather-bound book with the name Jefferson embossed in gold. Inside were pages of handwritten notes, letters, and, most shocking of all, records that tied me to one of the most powerful families. And the country. I didn't understand all the details yet, but one thing was clear. I wasn't just some random foster kid. I was somebody. And if the Brucks were so desperate to keep that a secret, then it must have been a secret worth knowing. You ever have one of those moments where you feel like you're in the middle of a movie, and you're the main character who just found out they're part of some wild conspiracy? That was me. Standing in the attic, holding this leather-bound book with Jefferson written across the front, I felt like I'd stepped into a whole different reality. This wasn't just a random name on a piece of paper. It was a direct link to something way bigger than I'd ever imagined. The book was filled with handwritten letters, family trees, and legal documents. It took me a minute to piece everything together, but the gist of it was crystal clear. I wasn't just Malcolm, the forgotten foster kid. I was connected, by blood, to the Jefferson family. Yeah, that Jefferson family. The name rang bells for a reason. They weren't just rich, they were powerful. Politicians, activists, CEOs, they were the kind of people who got buildings named after them. And here I was, stuck in a closet-sized room, being treated like an unpaid intern for the Brucks. The irony wasn't lost on me. I didn't sleep that night. My brain was on overdrive, trying to figure out what this all meant. If I was related to the Jeffersons, why the hell was I here? Why wasn't I with them? And most importantly, why were the Brucks so desperate to keep this under wraps? Every answer I thought I had just led to more questions. The next morning, things got even weirder. Jen was already in full passive-aggressive mode, slamming cupboards and sighing dramatically every time I walked into the room. Greg was no better, giving me these hard, suspicious looks like I was plotting to rob the place. Honestly, the way they were acting made it pretty clear they knew I'd found something, and they were scared. At breakfast, I decided to test the waters. "Hey," I said, keeping my tone casual, "who are the Jeffersons?" The reaction was immediate. Jen froze mid-toast spread, and Greg nearly choked on his coffee. For a second, the kitchen was dead silent, except for the sound of Greg coughing like he'd just inhaled a bug. "Why would you ask that?" Jen said, her voice too high-pitched to be convincing. "No reason," I shrugged. "Just came across the name somewhere." "Well, it's nothing you need to worry about," Greg snapped, his face turning an alarming shade of red. "Now finish your breakfast and get to school." His tone made it clear the conversation was over, but their reactions told me everything I needed to know. I was on the right track, and they were terrified I'd figure out the rest. At school, I couldn't focus. Every time the teacher droned on about algebra or history, my mind drifted back to that book in the attic. I felt like I was carrying a secret so big it might crush me. It didn't help that the whispers and stares seemed worse than usual. I swear, even the teachers were looking at me differently, like they knew something I didn't. Paranoia? Maybe. But it didn't feel like it. When I got home, the tension in the house was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Jen and Greg were barely speaking to each other, and every time I walked into a room, they'd either go silent or change the subject. It was like living with two badly written villains in a soap opera. That night, I decided I'd had enough. If they weren't going to give me answers, I'd find them myself. I waited until they went to bed, then snuck back into the attic and grabbed the book. This time, I wasn't just skimming, I was digging. And what I found made my head spin. Turns out the Jeffersons had been looking for me. There were letters in the book addressed to whoever had custody of me, offering to take me in, no questions asked. But those letters had never been sent. The Brucks had intercepted them, probably because they knew if the Jeffersons found me, their little paycheck scheme would go up in flames. I felt a mix of rage and disbelief. They'd kept me hidden, treated me like garbage, and all the while, I could have been living a completely different life. A better life. The kind of life where I wasn't just that black kid in a white school or the Brucks' personal maid. I didn't know what my next move was, but one thing was certain. I wasn't staying silent anymore. If the Brucks thought they could keep me under their thumb, they were about to get a rude awakening. You know how people say the truth will set you free? Yeah, well, they forget to mention it'll probably blow your life to hell first. That's exactly what happened after I found those letters. I wasn't just sitting on some minor family drama. I was holding a grenade with the pin pulled out. And the Brucks? They were the ones who handed it to me. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen like nothing had happened. Jen was busy slicing fruit, her face stretched into this overly tight smile that looked more like a grimace. Greg was hunched over his coffee, muttering under his breath about a long day at work. They were both trying so hard to act normal, it was almost funny. Almost. "So," I said, dropping into my chair, "what would you guys do if someone found out you were lying to them?" Jen froze, the knife slipping in her hand and nearly taking a chunk of apple with it. Greg looked up sharply, his face a mix of confusion and anger. "What are you talking about?" Jen asked, her voice shaky. "Oh, nothing," I said, leaning back like I didn't have a care in the world. "Just wondering how people deal with, betrayal. Lies. Keeping big, important secrets. Stuff like that." Greg slammed his mug down so hard I thought it might shatter. "I don't know what you think you're implying, but you better watch your mouth," I smirked. "Relax, Greg. Just making conversation." They both knew I was onto them, and the way their faces twisted with panic was honestly the best part of my morning. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. That afternoon, I got home from school to find a black SUV parked outside the house. At first, I thought it was one of Greg's poker buddies, but when I walked in, the energy in the room hit me like a brick wall. Jen and Greg were sitting on the couch, pale as ghosts, and across from them was a man in a sharp suit that probably cost more than their mortgage. His expression was calm, but there was this intensity in his eyes that screamed, "I know everything." "Malcolm," the man said, standing up as I walked in. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." Who are you?" I asked, glancing between him and the Brucks, whose faces were now a delightful shade of panic. "My name is David," he said, extending a hand. "I'm an attorney for the Jefferson family." Boom! Just like that, the grenade went off. I didn't even get a chance to process it before Greg jumped to his feet. "We don't need your help," he barked. Malcolm's doing just fine here. Is he? David asked, raising an eyebrow. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been collecting government checks while deliberately keeping him away from his rightful family. That's fraud, by the way. Jen let out this weird, high-pitched laugh, like she was trying to convince herself it wasn't happening. We've done nothing wrong, she stammered. We're just trying to give him a stable home. David didn't even blink. Stable? I've seen his room. Calling it a broom closet would be generous. I couldn't help it. I snorted. Watching the Brucks squirm was the highlight of my week. David turned back to me, his expression softening. Malcolm, your family has been searching for you for years. They didn't know what happened after the foster system lost track of you. But they never stopped looking. You belong with them. Hearing those words was like getting hit with a tidal wave. For so long I'd been told I was nobody, just some kid who didn't matter. And now here was this man, telling me I had a family, a real one, who actually cared. Greg tried one last time to salvage the situation. He's happy here, he said, his voice desperate. I stood there for a moment, looking at them. These people who had taken me in not because they wanted me, but because I came with a paycheck. And then I said the words I'd been dying to say for years. Happy? I laughed. You think I'm happy being your personal servant while you cash in on me? You've been lying to me my whole life and now you're mad because you got caught? Give me a break. David smiled faintly, like he was proud of me. And that's when I knew it was over. By the end of the day, I was sitting in the back of that black SUV, watching the Brucks' sad little beige house disappear in the rearview mirror. For the first time in forever, I felt free. Over the next few weeks, I met my real family. The Jeffersons weren't just powerful, they were kind, supportive, and everything I'd ever dreamed a family could be. They told me about my parents, about the legacy I was a part of, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged. As for the Brucks, let's just say their charity act didn't hold up under scrutiny. Between the fraud charges and the media fallout, they got exactly what they deserved. And me? Well, I'm just getting started. Turns out being a Jefferson isn't just about where you come from, it's about what you do with it. And trust me, I've got big plans. Thank you to everyone who listened to this story. We hope you enjoyed it and found it as gripping as we did while creating it. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel Life Mosaic. We're always here to bring you the most captivating and thought-provoking stories. Take care, and we'll see you again tomorrow with another incredible tale.